Quite a lot to talk about when it comes to the United States and where it stands with Israel. So to talk about it all, I'm joined in studio by Editor-in-Chief at History Central, as well as a columnist at Newsweek, Marc Schulman. Thanks for joining us. And also in studio, we have Brigadier General in Reserves, Hanan Geffen, former commander of the IDF's 8200 Intelligence Unit. Thank you both, gentlemen, for being with us. Marc, let's begin with you. Quite a lot of top stories taking over the news right now when it comes to the United States. The top story, at least on my mind right now, it's almost being overshadowed. We have this massive U.S. aid bill, the support coming out of the United States, but when you look at what's happening on the general streets, these protests against Israel, how can we have both right now?
Well, absolutely, we have both, because what we have is the extremism in the United States right now on all ends, but particularly now on the left. This has gone beyond anything we've ever seen before, both in the activism and the amount of extremism, and of course the fact that it has really turned into anti-Semitism at the same time. Clearly anti-Israel protests, I mean, we don't like it, but that's fine. You want to protest what we're doing in Gaza? Also, we don't like it, but that's fine. But those protests have clearly moved way beyond that. Speaking to a Columbia student while I was in the States last week, she was telling me how it's almost impossible to walk around the campus and feel like you're Jewish. No one's willing to put on a Jewish star or act if they're Jewish on the campus because they get harassed all of the time.
And that was before this. We heard about in the 1930s. You
Absolutely.
Don't expect that in 2024.
Right. I mean, not only harassed, but we've seen cases where they've blocked the Jewish students from moving around. We saw the case where the Israeli professor was removed from his ability to enter the campus, and not because he had done anything wrong, because the campus could not guarantee his safety. Think about that. A professor at Columbia University, because he's Israel and pro-Israel, he talks about Israel, the campus can't protect him on the campus. We've also seen a tremendous turnout of the faculty supporting the demonstrators. Yesterday, I think it was, it would look like, I couldn't see the exact numbers, but it looked like at least 500 faculty members protesting the previous arrest of campus students who were there illegally. Now, they were given an area to be, and they were told to leave at a certain point. They didn't. The president of Columbia felt there was no choice but to have them arrested. And of course, there are those students who were terminated, or suspended, I should say, on Barnard. Reports overnight that they've been reinstated this quickly. So, and we talked about a midnight deadline. As far as I know from at least 2 minutes ago, the midnight deadline has come and gone. There are rumors it was extended to 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't know. But the reality is it's gone way out of control at this point. Now, luckily for the campuses, there's only a week left of school. What will be with commencement exercises is not at all clear. Columbia is either thinking of moving it off campus to a stadium or possibly canceling it altogether.
Let's talk about those faculty, because as you mentioned, on the one hand, there's an Israeli faculty member who is barred from entering the school. And instead of his co-workers standing up in solidarity with him, they're standing up in solidarity for the protesters who are making it an unsafe work environment for him to be in. So how does, I guess, this faculty enhance the culture that seems to be brewing on these college campuses?
Well, it's come from the faculty to a very large extent. I saw the change. I was an undergraduate in Columbia in the 70s, and the Middle East Institute was quite, I would say pro-Israel, but it was down the line, average, you know, Middle East history was what they cared about. They weren't particularly pro-Palestinian, particularly pro-Israel. By the time I went back in the 80s as a graduate student, it had changed. The Middle East Institute was totally Arabist. Israelis were not invited to brown bag luncheons. As a matter of fact, I organized an alternative brown bag luncheons where I brought some Israeli speakers to Columbia because they weren't brought by the Middle East Institute. They wouldn't bring Israelis to the brown bag luncheons. So the reality that had changed. Up until the late 80s, there was a professor, Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, known for the author of the Zionist idea. When he retired or pushed out, I'm not quite sure how it ended, he was never replaced. Those sort of courses are no longer at the university. So there was a change back in the 80s and 90s, and by now, the young faculty and not so young faculty are very anti-Israel, very Arabist in their connections and directions, and they affect the students. They affect the students from the very beginning of the school. There's a course called Contemporary Civilization that every Columbia College student has to take. When I was there, it was all Aristotle and Kant and all sorts of similar great thinkers. I was like, why don't they teach something more contemporary? Well, now they teach something more contemporary. Colonialist theory, and the theory that any action is good if you're ending colonialism. Everything is okay. And that's literally a required course at Columbia for undergraduates. So we should not be surprised. We can be a little bit surprised at the jump from anti-Israel to anti-Jew and anti-Semitism. Part of that, I think, is brought by the most extreme groups. A lot of the Palestinians are, when we sort of talk about, oh, it's good if some of the Palestinians leave. Well, every Palestinian who leaves brings anti-Semitism to America these days. And I think we can look a lot of the roots of that, where the jump from anti-Israel to anti-Semitism comes from that community. But it's beyond that. And history is full of stories of anti-Semitism where as soon as something is wrong, it's always the Jews that are at fault. So, look, I was on Dallas TV the other night, and they asked me what's the last thing I could say to them. And I said, look, when there's extremism, whether it's on the right or the left, that's where anti-Semitism comes from. Be moderate in your thoughts, and that's certainly not what's going on in the United States right now.
And certainly then what we're seeing on these college campuses, we're seeing something completely different in the White House. A massive aid bill, $17 billion of it coming here towards Israel once President Biden does sign off on it. So, Hanan, when we're looking at the ongoing war efforts, how will something like this help enhance Israel's ability to combat wherever these different fights and fronts may be?
Yeah, this aid bill is joined together with, we have never seen the Americans so, siding with Israel and on a basic problem. And the one of it, which is the basic of this fight that will go on, is the understanding that Hamas, this religious Islamic Brotherhood organization, cannot prevail in Gaza, cannot be prevail in Judea and Samaria, and he has to be uprooted. And now this is, I would say there are some of the American this administration persistent on it. Sometimes I feel it even stronger than some of the Israeli public, a small part of the Israeli public, that will go back again and trying to see, let's talk with the Palestinian, the Hamas and so on, try to find way. What we have taken ourselves for the last 30 or 40 years is to be the one that looked for solution. The other side did not want a solution, and it galvanized into this treacherous, religious, anti-Israeli Hamas organization. Now we have this hard task, running for the long run, not the short run, the exit and so on, and trying to take Hamas out of the Palestinian. Hamas, the organization, Hamas, the idea. And here the American support is tremendous. We have never thought, I wouldn't have never imagined that the world, which is, in short, America, will let us go on this kind of war for 7 months. And there are more, 3 or 4 months to go until we come to a more conclusive result. Hamas is out of power in Gaza. Hamas in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria is threatened. The cells, the focal points where Hamas is leading now in the towns of the Judea and Samaria will be out of power, and it will take some more time. The American support, I would say, is the only silver line we see so far.
Yeah, I was someone who, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would say we should get out. We should move away from support from the United States. We're a rich country. We were quite rich, and I was saying, we shouldn't be dependent on the United States for money. Technology, work together with the American army, all those things are great, but we don't need American money at this point. Today we need it. That's the reality. Today, after this war, which has been incredibly expensive, and with no real end in sight and the amount of munitions we've used, we need the American support. We need the American money. We need the American production capabilities. That's something we forget. We may be able to produce some of our arms. We can't produce enough. As a matter of fact, the only country in the world that can produce arms for both us and the Ukraine is the United States. And that is very, very important at this point. We need their assistance now. We may not have needed it 2 or 3 years ago. I guess I was wrong in thinking we could wean ourselves away, but I didn't expect this year to come to what it has been.
Right now, it certainly seems to be the case, and it certainly seems, at least for now, we continue to have it. Now, as we mentioned about the anti-Semitism that's happening in the United States, it's not only there, it's also happening in Europe. Anti-Semitism, it's sprouting up in France right now. A Jewish French woman was allegedly kidnapped, raped, and threatened with murder, all by a man who sought revenge for Palestinians. The 32-year-old man is being charged with religiously motivated death threats and use of narcotics, according to French media. Meanwhile, as Israel marked 200 days of war just yesterday, families and supporters of Israeli hostages held captive in Gaza protested late last night in the center of Tel Aviv. Hands bound, mouths sealed, but their message very clear. 200 days and nothing has changed.
Because for 200 days we have the hostages kidnapped to Gaza, and it's just atrocious, impossible. People in the world need to understand what's happening here in Israel. We were attacked, we were almost destroyed as a nation, and I don't understand why we don't have 1 million people here in the streets.
Today is the 200th day that we have hostages, kidnapped people, babies, women, old people, soldiers were kidnapped 200 days ago. My brother-in-law is back there in Gaza, and with 132 more people, it's too much. It needs to be end. We need to have our peace.
Hamas, on the other hand, is making a different statement on the 200th day of fighting, calling for an escalation on all fronts. In a televised speech carried by Al Jazeera, the spokesman for Hamas's armed Al-Qassam brigades praised Iran for its massive missile and drone attack on Israel and called for those in the West Bank and Jordan to join the fight. Now, in regards to ceasefire talks, he said his terror group is sticking to its demands of a complete ceasefire, IDF troops pulling out of Gaza, and for displaced Palestinians to return to the north. In the southern part of the Gaza Strip, Hamas officials claim to find a mass grave with more than 200 bodies at a hospital in Khan Yunis. The IDF, however, is setting the record straight, saying this is a completely baseless claim. And evidence suggests any bodies buried in the area were buried by Palestinians, not IDF troops. The IDF did, however, say during operations near and around Nasser Hospital, troops examined corpses in an effort to locate hostages, but only when they had intelligence Israeli hostages might have been buried in the area. No bodies of any hostages were ever found. So quite a lot as the fighting does continue. I want to come back in studio now. Hanan, when we're looking at something like this, take example, the Hamas spokesperson calling for more fronts to be enraged after 200 days of fighting. But this is something that so far, for 200 days, Hamas has failed to do. They've wanted to incite more violence in the West Bank, in Jordan. While we might have seen a few incidents here and there spark up, it does seem for the most part they have failed in their messaging.
Yeah, and one of the messages that he was, I would say that the central message was, the focal point of his speech was calling the hostage family to pressure on the Israeli government. He even mentioned Ron Arad. He mentioned Shaul Oron. He mentioned all the hostages trying to exert pressure on the Israeli government. It seems to be the only weapon they feel, the guys in the bunker there, Yahya Sinwar, that they have left. They're crying to the Arab world, to the Muslim world, to the international world, didn't come to didn't help them, neither Turkey, and none of them. Now, this is general call. He doesn't believe Abu Ubaidah that he is really will make a difference. His call was to the hostage families, and this is a tragedy because we know that the Hamas will not let these hostages what they call card, a paper that help them to carry on with their mission to stay in power, to regain power, and to come again, as they promised, 7th of October will reoccur. Now, this is a tragedy because it seems right now, the only solution will be exerting more power, the Rafah operation. It will take more time. Hopefully, then the results will be better than right now. Any negotiation with Hamas, any discussion with Hamas is fruitless. We see Qatar a week ago just said we lost faith in the process. Turkey is trying to join in. They know that there is no process. The only one that right now is interested in any kind of process is Hamas. It needs the ceasefire. And the only means try to achieve it is through pressuring hostage families to pressure Israel to get out of Gaza, stop the war, which I would say that when I'm veteran in this country, I've never seen such a unity in the Israeli part. I would say 80% of the Israeli population will not agree to a straightforward ceasefire. Temporary one, yes, but not a straightforward, and not letting Hamas off the hook. We always, I mentioned already, we are for short run, used to. Now, I believe that the public in Israel understand that this is a long run. It's a long run, we have to stay longer.
He's more optimistic than I am that there's a chance that we could actually destroy Hamas in the next 2 or 3 months. I'm very skeptical. I mean, I wish it's true, don't get me wrong. And I'm 100% in favor of the Rafah operation if it could work and actually destroy Hamas. But we were in Khan Yunis for 4 months. For 4 months, we thought we would end Hamas there. We'd find Sinwar. Well, he wasn't waiting. Does anyone really think he's waiting in Rafah either? He's somewhere else at this point. So my concern is that I agree. I mean, Hamas has to be gone, without a question. I'm doing research for a book, and I was looking back at the 1990s, and right after the Oslo Peace Accords were signed, 3 suicide bombings in Israel immediately turned the country away from the Oslo in support of the Oslo peace process. And then after the assassination of Rabin, 3 more bombings ensured the fact that Shimon Peres lost the election, but Bibi Netanyahu became the prime minister. So Hamas has been at this for a long, long time. They're destructive. Any chance, any time in the future, reaching any sort of peace agreement with the Palestinians and living together with them has to be after Hamas no longer exists. However, between my wish and reality, I don't know. 6 months is a long time. Of course, it's a different time and different circumstances. But during the Sinai War, which is in 1956, a group of basically home front soldiers captured all of Gaza in 1 day. And it's completely different. It's not the same. But just keep in mind that we're 6 months in, and we have not succeeded in totally destroying Hamas in an area really very, very small. So that's my concern. The hostages, I mean, we really have the choice. The choice is we end the war and get back the hostages, or we do our best right now to really eliminate Hamas and actually succeed at doing that.
And how does it all tie in with international pressure as well?
Look, every day the war goes on is bad for us on the international scene. It's particularly bad because our efforts at Hasbarat, at explaining ourselves, is just so poor. The story about Nasser Hospital came out 3 days ago, picked up by everybody, Israeli massacre found, etc., etc. The first for a couple of tweets that claimed and showed how it was used previously as a cemetery. I don't see a massive campaign to show the world what we found there, and the fact that it was absurd to begin with. I mean, the idea that we could have killed 300 people and buried them and it wouldn't come out amongst our soldiers, I mean, it's impossible to have happened. But we don't know how to take the offensive. We're sort of quiet for a while, then we tweet about it, and then it's picked up by here. But I don't see a massive effort to sort of kill that story, or anything else for that matter. Look what happened just now with UNRWA. The fact that UNRWA claimed that we didn't give the information. Now, why? Because it was no one's priority. No one in his old unit was told, this is the highest priority right now to get information to UNRWA of who was involved from UNRWA.
Publicity behind all of it.
Right.
It's certainly not been in Israel's...
It's priority. It's making it a priority. No one makes it a priority because no one's really in charge of it. The army spokesman is in charge of speaking. But he doesn't have the power within the army to say, take 10 people from his old unit and say, stop whatever you're doing, get that information to us. And we don't understand. We're fighting a worldwide war. The war is not only kinetic, it's also informational. And we're not fighting the informational war the same way.
Be one of the largest ones that Israel does continue to need to fight. Marc Schulman and Hanan Geffen, appreciate your insight into all of these developing stories as always.